Stop thinking that Kundalini is a spiritual legend reserved for monks in the Himalayas, or a psychotic crisis disguised as an awakening. The two versions you've heard, the mystical one which treats it as sacred magic, and the skeptical one which treats it as delusion, are wrong for the same reason. Neither one has looked inside your nervous system. There is a third path built not by a guru, but by a biomedical engineer named Itzhak Bentov, and what he discovered completely changes how you will understand the sensations your own body is capable of generating. In the next few minutes, I will show you the physical, measurable, replicable mechanism behind what millions of people call energy rising up the spine. And I will show you why most human bodies alive today are biologically prevented from even getting close to that. Not for lack of faith, but for an excess of noise in the nervous system. Itzhak Bentov was neither a monk nor a spiritual therapist, nor did he come from any organized esoteric tradition. He was an Israeli-American inventor, a biomedical engineer, the type of mind that spent his life designing precision surgical instruments and sensors capable of capturing microscopic movements of the human body. And it was exactly this engineer's gaze, obsessed with vibration, oscillation, and frequency, that he decided to point toward the Kundalini experience. While the Indian tradition described a serpent of energy sleeping at the base of the spine, and Western skepticism dismissed it all as folklore, Bentov asked the simplest and most dangerous question of all: what if this serpent is, in fact, a mechanical wave pattern that any human nervous system is capable of producing under specific conditions? He wasn't interested in proving or disproving a spiritual tradition. He was interested in physiology, and by applying biomedical engineering principles to the body in deep states of meditation, he arrived at a model that removes Kundalini from the territory of miracles and places it within the territory of measurable biology, a mechanism that every nervous system, in theory, already carries built into its own architecture. This changes everything, because it means the experience is not a spiritual prize granted to a few chosen ones. It is a physiological process with identifiable preconditions, and that is precisely where most people get lost. They treat Kundalini as an external event that happens to you, when in fact, according to Bentov's model, it is the direct and predictable result of a very specific internal state that your own body may or may not reach. The question was never, do I deserve this? The correct question is my nervous system in the necessary physiological conditions for this wave to form? And that is what we are going to dismantle, piece by piece from now on. The starting point of Bentov's model is the heart, not as a symbol but as an organ. Each heartbeat is not just a pump pushing blood, it is a mechanical event that generates a small shock, a micro-oscillation that propagates throughout the entire body, including the spinal column. Imagine tapping the base of a pipe full of liquid. The vibration doesn't stay stuck at the point of impact, it travels through the entire tube. That is exactly what happens, beat after beat, inside your spine. The problem is that in daily life, this micro-oscillation is lost in the middle of the chaos. Chronic muscle tension, shallow and short breathing, the sympathetic nervous system triggered in constant alert. It's like trying to hear a whisper inside a crowded stadium shouting all at once. The wave exists, but it is drowned out by noise. Bentov realized that, in deep states of meditation, when the musculature truly relaxes, when the breathing becomes slow and regular, when the autonomic nervous system enters a rare state of low sympathetic activity, this micro-oscillation, cardiac rhythm ceases to be lost. It begins to propagate cleanly along the vertebral column, passing through the canal where the cerebrospinal fluid circulates, the fluid that bathes the brain and spinal cord like a liquid shock absorber. And here is the core point of the mechanism. When this micro-oscillation meets the cerebrospinal fluid in conditions of sufficient physiological silence, it does not dissipate, it resonates. It begins to form what physics calls a standing wave, a vibration pattern that sustains and amplifies itself within a closed space, like the note that emerges when you blow correctly into a glass bottle. This standing wave, generated by the heart's own rhythm under conditions of extreme stillness, rises up the spine and reaches specific structures of the brainstem and, progressively, the sensory cortex, the region of the brain responsible for processing physical sensation, touch, temperature, and the body's position in space. And it is precisely there, according to the model of Bentov, that the classic sensation described for millennia is born, the vivid impression of energy rising up the spine. It is not a metaphor, it is not imagination, it is the sensory cortex being stimulated rhythmically and progressively by a real mechanical wave, generated by the heart itself, amplified by the cerebrospinal fluid, in a body that has finally become still enough to let it happen. The awakening serpent of the Indian tradition and the cardiocranial standing wave of Bentov describe in completely different languages the same physical event. But here is the detail that most people never hear. This mechanism is not a switch that turns itself on. It depends on coherence, and most human bodies living in a modern urban rhythm are structurally prevented from generating this coherence because the nervous system is busy all the time, managing threats that are not even real. Think of your own routine. You wake up and the body triggers cortisol before you even check your phone. The jaw tightens, the shoulders rise, breathing becomes short, trapped in the upper chest. This is not a neutral state. It is a sympathetic nervous system in chronic activation, a body in permanent survival mode, and a body in survival mode will never generate a clean standing wave in the spine, because all the mechanical energy of the heartbeat is being absorbed by the noise of muscle tension and neurological hypervigilance. It is basically impossible to hear a whisper in the middle of a screaming stadium. It was precisely by understanding this type of physiological blockage that I decided to prepare the Imán da Prosperidade for you. Because the same hypervigilant nervous system that prevents Bentov's standing wave from forming is the nervous system that sabotages your relationship with money every single day, without you realizing it. You may repeat abundance affirmations in the morning, but if your body continues to operate in a mode of scarcity and alert, the field simply reflects this incoherence back. The Imán da Prosperidade is a 28-day journey designed to reduce the neurological noise that keeps you trapped in an identity of scarcity, allowing your nervous system to reach the same type of physiological coherence that Bentov described, only applied directly to your relationship with money, value, and worthiness. If you already feel like you try to think positive, but your body keeps vibrating in financial panic, comment on the first pinned comment now, because that is where I left the complete path for this journey, and also comment Eu escolho a coherencia. If you are ready to stop sabotaging your own abundance with a nervous system at war, let us return to the mechanism, because understanding the symptoms is understanding why they should never have been treated as supernatural. When this standing wave truly begins to form and travel along the spine, the body does not remain silent. It reacts because it is a real measurable increase in metabolic and electrical activity occurring in specific regions of the central nervous system. The sensations of intense heat rising up the spine. A direct consequence of increased local metabolic activity. More neuronal activity requires more oxygen, more blood flow, and this generates real, not imagined heat. The vibrations and tremors that often accompany deep states of meditation, patterns of neuronal electrical firing intensifying and synchronizing, the nervous system literally reorganizing its activity in real time, the electric currents running through arms and legs, a tingling that seems to have a life of its own. Cross-sensory activation, the cortex processing signals from multiple regions of the body at the same time, in an amplified way, because the normal attention filter that ignores 99% of body sensations is temporarily turned off. And the inner lights, those flashes and vivid visual patterns, reported in practically every contemplative tradition on the planet, independently of one another. Stimulation of the visual cortex via pathways that normally do not receive this type of activation, the brain seeing an increase in electrical activity that it is generating itself. None of this requires a miracle. It only requires a nervous system operating with a volume of electrical and metabolic activity far above the common resting standard, channeled by a real mechanical wave rising up the spine. The much-reported expansion of consciousness, this sensation that the body's boundaries are dissolving, that perception expands far beyond the habitual point of view, also finds an explanation in this increase in activity, when regions of the brain normally responsible for maintaining the sense of boundary between self and world receive this unusual electrical influx. The subjective sensation of separation diminishes. You are not merging with the universe in an abstract metaphysical way. Your brain is literally processing an amount of sensory and electrical information that it normally filters and discards. And the subjective result of this is exactly the sensation of expansion that ancient texts tried to describe with the spiritual language they had available at the time. And see how this changes the way of looking at the entire experience. Instead of treating each symptom as a separate mystical event, Bentov offers a single common thread, elevated neurological and metabolic activity, organized around a cardiocranial mechanical wave. Heat, vibration, electric current, inner light, expansion of consciousness. These are not 5 distinct miracles. They are 5 different expressions of the same central physiological phenomenon. This type of physiological coherence that we are describing is not abstract. It was exactly by building this type of coherence applied to your financial identity that I designed the Imán da Prosperidade. The mission remains the same, to reduce the neurological noise that prevents your body from operating in a state where the field, be it the quantum field of reality or the field of your own financial decisions, finally reflects what you say you want, and not the panic your nervous system is transmitting in the background. The first pinned comment has everything you need to start. If you have already understood that a symptom without coherence is just noise, comment "Eu sou coerente" now. Now we need to talk about the most demanding condition of the entire process, because this is where most people, even experienced meditation practitioners, never come close. Bentov's model makes it clear that this cardiocranial standing wave does not form in just any state. It requires a level of physical and mental stillness that goes far beyond simply sitting with eyes closed for a few minutes. We are talking about a state of high physiological coherence, genuinely relaxed musculature, not just motionless, slow, regular, almost imperceptible breathing, heart rate, stable and rhythmic, and crucially a drastic reduction in the activity of the sympathetic nervous system, that same system responsible for the fight or flight response. And this is where the Bentov mechanism becomes, without exaggeration, a direct critique of the modern lifestyle. Because chronic stress is not just uncomfortable, it is physiologically incompatible with this process. A body that carries residual muscle tension in the jaw, shoulders or abdomen is constantly generating micro-interferences that break any possibility of a clean standing wave. A nervous system living in a state of sympathetic hyperactivity, that state of permanent alert that practically everyone today treats as normal, keeps the body too busy managing imaginary threats to allow the cardiac micro-oscillation to propagate coherently through the spine. It is not willpower. It is not spiritual merit. It is pure biology. A nervous system in survival mode lacks the bandwidth available to generate internal resonance. Think of your own body right now as you listen to this. Where are you holding tension that you no longer even notice? Most people live for years, entire decades, with a basal level of muscle contraction so constant that they have completely forgotten what the sensation of genuine relaxation feels like. And it is exactly this level of neuromuscular noise that Bentov identifies as the main blockage, not a lack of faith, not the absence of a spiritual gift, but a nervous system addicted to tension, incapable of turning the volume down enough for the wave to appear. This also explains why so many contemplative traditions historically required years, sometimes decades, of disciplined practice before any sign of activation appeared. It was not an arbitrary test of spiritual patience. It was the time necessary to dismantle, layer by layer, a neuromuscular pattern of hypervigilance built over a lifetime. And here is the good news hidden within this physiological explanation. If the blockage is biological, then the solution can also be biological. It is not about praying harder. It is about deliberately building the physiological conditions of coherence that allow your own body's natural mechanism to finally operate without interference. But the Bentov model is not just a promise. It is also a serious warning. And this is where the conversation needs to get uncomfortable for a moment. Because although the complete process depends on stillness and coherence, there are documented cases where partial or disordered activation happens in an organism that has not yet built this foundation. And when this happens, the result is neither elegant nor gradual. It is abrupt, intense, often frightening. The person begins to feel waves of uncontrolled heat, tremors that do not stop, electric sensations that shoot off without warning, severe insomnia, extreme emotional oscillations, episodes of overwhelming anxiety, sometimes even symptoms that resemble psychotic symptoms, altered perceptions of reality, a sensation of falling apart, deep fear of going crazy. And here is the real problem, the problem that Bentov and researchers who followed his line of work raised with urgency. In many of these cases, healthcare professionals, lacking context regarding this specific physiological mechanism, classify the entire experience as a psychiatric disorder, an episode of mania, a bout of severe generalized anxiety, sometimes even a psychotic state, and treat only the superficial symptoms without recognizing the underlying physiological pattern that is generating them. This does not mean denying that real psychiatric suffering exists or that professional help is not necessary. It is and remains essential in any crisis situation. But the Bentov argument is that there is an identifiable physical pattern in these episodes of disordered activation. They tend to concentrate along the axis of the vertebral column. They involve very specific somatic sensations of heat and electric current that are not typical of most generalized anxiety disorders and often arise after periods of intense meditation practice, prolonged fasting, acute physical or emotional trauma, or events that have drastically altered the person's respiratory pattern and autonomic nervous system tone. Recognizing this difference is not about romanticizing suffering. It is about giving people who go through this a map that explains what is happening inside their own body, instead of leaving them alone with the fear that they are simply breaking down inside for no reason at all. This distinction between chaotic activation and coherent activation is exactly why real preparation matters just as much as spiritual openness. And that is why the Iman da Prosperidade was never intended as a magic shortcut, but as a gradual construction of coherence, 28 days structured, so that your nervous system stops operating in the chronic financial emergency mode that sabotages any attempt at real change. If you recognized while listening to this part that you have experienced spikes of financial anxiety that seemed greater than the actual situation justified, that is your nervous system firing without coherence, exactly the type of disordered pattern we are describing. The first pinned comment has the complete path to transforming this into a structured process rather than chaos. Comment EU Escolo o Novo Estado. If you understand that the time has come to build real coherence instead of waiting for the activation to happen on its own, by surprise without preparation, you can close this video now, go back to your routine, and tomorrow morning your body will wake up exactly where it left off. The same tension in the jaw, the same pattern of financial alert, the same nervous system incapable of generating enough coherence for any real change to happen, neither spiritual nor material. The mechanism that Bentov described does not judge, does not wait, does not make exceptions. It simply responds to the physiological conditions you offer it, every day, with or without your conscious attention. Biology is not waiting for you to believe in it. It is already operating right now, according to the pattern of tension or coherence that you are carrying at this very moment. The question is not whether the mechanism exists, it is what instruction you are giving to it. And it is precisely at this point that Bentov's model ceases to be just a curiosity about altered states of consciousness and reveals itself as something much larger, a proposal about where the human nervous system is, literally, evolving. According to Bentov, when this process is completed coherently, without the chaos of disordered activation, built upon a real foundation of physiological stillness, the nervous system does not simply return to its previous state. It reorganizes itself at a higher level of functioning. The neural pathways that previously required extreme effort to generate synchrony between heart, breath, and brain activity begin to operate that way much more naturally. Sensory perception expands in a stable manner, not just in occasional peaks of deep meditation, and states of consciousness that once required decades of disciplined practice to be visited briefly begin to become an accessible part of the person's daily experience. This is the core of Bentov's proposal. Kundalini is not a spiritual prize reserved for a chosen few, nor a dangerous anomaly that should be avoided at all costs. It is a natural evolutionary mechanism embedded in the very architecture of the human nervous system that manifests when the correct physiological conditions of coherence are finally met. The human body, in this view, is not a passive receiver of spiritual experiences that come from outside. It is an active generator capable of producing, through purely physical and measurable, the higher states of consciousness already described by humanity in all of its contemplative traditions. And if this is true for the nervous system dealing with energy, light, and expansion of consciousness, it is also true for the nervous system dealing with money, value, and worthiness. The same principle of coherence that Bentov identified in the spinal column applies to your entire relationship with reality. Because at the end of the day, the field does not respond to your words, to your affirmations repeated every morning without real conviction. It responds to the physiological state that your body is transmitting, second after second, long before any conscious thought enters the scene. You can continue sending mixed signals, affirming abundance in the morning, and living in the panic of scarcity the rest of the day, and repeat this same cycle indefinitely. Or you can decide now to start building the real coherence that both the Bentov mechanism and your own financial life require. The Imán da Prosperidade exists exactly for this, a 28-day journey to dismantle the neurological noise that keeps your body trapped in the identity of scarcity, and to reprogram your internal field until it finally vibrates at the same frequency of the abundance you say you want. The first pinned comment has everything you need to start today. Comment EU so coherente if you understand that it is time to stop sending mixed signals to the field and decide, because biology, as always, is already waiting for your instruction.